the library was part of the overall county general fund, and they were the department master sheriff, the assessor. Things would get tight, then they'd say this is a non-essential service, therefore it seemed like the library was always getting cut. So that was one of the things that instigated this. But the third Saturday is also interesting because back in those days, we had hunting season when you could get a tag. Yeah, you could actually go out and hunt. And the third Saturday, deer season was over, elk season hadn't quite begun, so Orville said that will work. So, in recent times, the endowment fund has tried to take a step back because we had the building going on, the building fund and that, and there was always confusion. What am I donating to? How do we make this happen? So hopefully we're going to get that where Amy wants it in the near future, and then we will be maybe a little more aggressive in what the endowment fund will do.
So some of you may remember that earlier this summer we got an unexpected $100,000 from Oregon Community Foundation, which is the very best kind of money to get. Which is the stipulation on that money is towards completion of the new main library. And then we have about another $30,000 from other sources to go with it. So what we're planning to do, and I'm writing the request for quotes right now, a lot of acoustic panels. So the whole roof above the fiction section that just is drywall right now with no paint on it, that's supposed to be covered by acoustic panels. They don't look like this. They just look like regular ceiling, but they keep the noise from bouncing all around, which is very important after story time. Also acoustic panels that are similar in the meeting room, which is also very important during story time to keep those instruments and voices from deafening you. And will also make your meetings better when you use our meeting rooms. We're also going to be getting some technology carts for the meeting room, which will house, we have a conference phone unit that will be available to the public, a TV, a laptop, a DVD player, that kind of stuff, so you can use that room and use that technology as you see fit for your organizations. We're also going to be purchasing a computer and microfilm reader in our Oregon history room. I don't know if you guys are aware, but the University of Oregon has had for a really long time a digital newspaper project. So they have microfilms of tons of Oregon newspapers, including the historic Silver Lake Leader, the Lake County Examiner, back to the beginning. At the library, we've been buying microfilm of the Lake County Examiner since 1954, so we have 1954 forward. And we want to hopefully do some other grant writing to go 1954 backwards. And then you could actually look at the microfilm in the library, which would be an amazing change for the good. We've also been fortunate to work with Oklahoma Corrections Enterprises, and that has nothing to do with the fact that I'm from Oklahoma. It just happened. It really isn't. But they have digitized a lot of the Lakeview yearbooks, and then we're going to move on to the the North Lake School and the Paisley School next. And those digitized copies of yearbooks will be available on the computer in the local history room. So that's something we'll be working on the next couple of years. Also, we will be working on some strategic sun shading. For those of you who have visited us in the last week or two on a sunny day, you can really feel that sun coming in right across from the desk. And there's just sometimes a day we need to tone that down. So we'll be doing a little bit of that. And then installing the brand panels, which will be above the circulation desk, that whole wall there where the mezzanine half wall is that goes up above. That'll be, over time, that'll be covered in many, many historic brands. I have really great memories of some of the people I worked with back in the 70s and fishing holes I visited in this part of the country. And so it's always great to get back here. And so I was going to talk a little bit about a kind of an obscure historical event known as the Lost Wagon Train of 1853, sometimes referred to as the Elliott Cutoff.
And just out of curiosity, a show of hands, how many of you are familiar with the Lost Wagon Train? A few. Not many people are. It's this was a really pretty compelling story, which involved some of the earliest immigrants to the Upper Willamette Valley. And yet I've talked to people who grew up in Eugene and had never heard of it. And of course, I didn't know anything about it either. And the way I found out about it was that there was a scrapbook that was passed down through my family by my mother's great-grandfather. His name was John Klein, and he had come west from Missouri in 1853. In this book, he kind of had some brief memoirs about his earlier life. He grew up in the hills of eastern Tennessee. As a young lieutenant, he was apparently had some involvement with the deportation of the Cherokee from that region. He then married, started a family, moved out to Missouri. He had his wife's brother fought in the Mexican War in mid-40s. And then there was kind of a string of tragedies in that family, after which he married his sister-in-law, and both of them had been widowed. And then they, with 8 children between them, they decided to head for Oregon. He didn't say a lot about the journey west. All he really said was that we were 6 months with ox teams and wagons from Missouri to Oregon. And we come down the McKenzie Fork into the Upper Willamette Valley. And then he goes on to say that all they had to eat the last few weeks of the journey was unseasoned beef. Well, this really kind of sparked my curiosity because, of course, my understanding about the Oregon Trail was, that the people would come across the Snake River into Oregon, and then they would head northwestward through the Blue Mountains and up into the Columbia drainage. I was not aware that there was any route that went over the Cascades in Central Oregon. And so I kind of started to do some research on it, and I found out a little bit more about the Klein family and also about this event known as the Lost Wagon Train. So, in the early 1850s, the lower part of the Willamette Valley was getting pretty well settled up around Portland and Oregon City. But the upper part of the valley was pretty sparsely settled at that time. And so the people of that region became interested, apparently, in opening up a new route through the Cascade Mountains, so that they could bring immigrants across Central Oregon and into the upper valley. So they started to plan for that. And in the summer of 1852, they formed a party of scouts to check out a possible route. And so there were 7 men who headed up the middle fork of the Willamette. When they got up into the crest of the Cascades, 2 of the men climbed up on a high peak so they could look out over the topography and to figure out the best route to get through the mountains. One of these men was John Diamond, and so that was how Diamond Peak got its name. So anyway, these men continued on out through the forests of the Cascades and out into the deserts to the east of there. And somewhere north of Malheur Lake, they apparently ran into some northern Paiute. They got into a skirmish. 3 of the men were wounded, and I believe they lost 4 of their horses. And they kind of had to make a fighting retreat to the northeast, so that where they then and it came into a stream of immigrants coming up into the Blue Mountains, somewhere around the Burnt River. They got some medical attention, and they decided to go back home by way of the regular Oregon Trail, which is represented by the blue line up here. So when they got back to the upper valley, they apparently reported that there was a feasible route that could be taken across Central Oregon. So the people of that region decided they started to raise money, and they started to plan for getting this route opened up the following summer. So in the late spring of 1853, a crew of workers started to open up a path up along the middle fork of the Willamette. And around that time, there was a man by the name of Elijah Elliott who had come west on the California Trail, and then he had come up north into Oregon and staked a claim in the Upper Valley. Well, he was going back on the Oregon Trail that summer to meet his wife and children who were coming out with some other people, and he planned on meeting them at Turner's Trading Post, which is pretty much where Vail, Oregon is now. And so the people of the Upper Valley prevailed on him to lead a party of immigrants across Central Oregon and over the new route that was scheduled to be opened up by the time the immigrants reached the Cascades. So in spite of the fact that he had never been over this route, he agreed to do this. So anyway, as Elliott is making his way back on the Oregon Trail, the workers had progressed up into the kind of higher part of the Cascades, and apparently, I guess there had been so much snow the previous winter that this was getting up into July, and there was too much snow up at the summit to get through. So the workers retired back to the valley, and around that time there was a couple conflicting articles in the Oregon Statesman, one which said that claimed that the route had been completed through the Cascades. Well, then there was a correction article published after that that indicated that it actually hadn't been completed, and that in fact it looked like it was kind of doubtful that they would be able to get it opened up in time for the immigration of that year. Well, I guess there was another attempt in August to try to force the road through, but it sounds like all they really achieved was to blaze the route through to the Deschutes River. So anyway, of course, back in those days, you couldn't just get on your cell phone or shoot out an email. So Elliott never got the word. And so when Elliott arrives back at Turner's Trading Post, he meets his family, and then he starts telling people about this new route that would save 150 miles to the Willamette Valley. Now, I think if you look at these two routes, you might tend to question that. But so anyway, of course, a lot of the people, I'm sure, probably figured that it would be safer to stick with the more established route. But probably it would have been the more vulnerable ones, the ones who had lost quite a bit of livestock coming across the country and were getting low on provisions. Those would have been the ones who would have probably thought, gee, if I can save 150 miles, maybe that's just what we need. So anyway, around the 1st of September, Elliott takes off up the Malheur River, along with about 100 wagons and probably several hundred people who decided to go with him. And they make their way up into the southern part of the Blue Mountains. Well, of course, they left word back at the Turner's Trading Post about this new route. And of course, immigrants kept on coming through there. And of course, some of them would decide to stick with the more established route, but many decided to follow Elliott. Well, I don't think Elliott ever knew how many people ultimately followed him. It was over 1,000 people and probably something like 250 wagons. So anyway, one of the parties that apparently came to Turner's Trading Post a few days after Elliott had already left was the Klein party. And John Klein had just lost his second wife just 2 weeks before that. She had apparently given birth to a baby girl at the Rock Creek Crossing, which is in the southern part of where Twin Falls, Idaho is now. And then 11 days later, after they had made the three-island crossing of the Snake River at Glenn's Ferry, they were proceeding up over the plains out probably east of Mountain Home, Idaho. And she died, leaving him with 6 surviving children by his first wife, 2 stepsons, and this newborn baby. Now, these children ranged in age from 13 all the way down. There was another party known as the Lehmans, and they had come from Michigan, and it seemed that they had been traveling in proximity to the Kleins for some time. And Esther Lehman had written an account of the journey, and she mentioned Mr. Klein, as she referred to him, and about the death of his wife. And apparently, a sister of hers had joined the Klein train, presumably to help out with all these children. So anyway, the Lehmans and the Kleins decided to take the new route. And but I guess the next morning, as they're getting ready to proceed up the Malheur River, the Lehmans discover that one of their cows has died, and they're looking at the prospect of maybe having to abandon one of their wagons. But she mentions that Mr. Klein gave them one of his cows so that they could continue on with that wagon. So it seemed like the Lehmans and Kleins had become pretty closely associated with each other. So anyway, this long stream of wagons proceed up over the Blue Mountains, which is kind of this stretch up through here. And this was described by some of the immigrants as being some of the roughest ground that they had been over, which is saying quite a bit given some of what they had been through in Wyoming and Idaho. So they make their way up over this string of mountains and down into the Malheur Lake Basin. So around that time, word gets passed back along the wagon train that they're trying to form an advance party of men and horses to go on ahead, get to the settlements, alert the settlers that they're coming, and try to arrange to bring provisions back on the trail. Because more and more people were beginning to fear that they didn't have enough provisions to make it to the valley. So anyway, there were apparently 8 young men who volunteered for this mission, and they apparently they came from various different wagon groups in this long train. So sometime around September 10th, they left the train, apparently with about 10 horses, and to go on ahead. Well, around that time, the front of this wagon train was camped at the Silvies River to the southeast of where Burns is now. And some scouts ran into some hostile Indians to the west. And so Elliot and a lot of the immigrants decide that they're going to divert around the south side of Malheur Lake. And when they get south of the lake, they discover they're going to have to divert further to the south to find a place to get the wagons across the Blitzen River. So that's where you have this kind of downward trip here. And then the route becomes a little bit sketchy in places, but they think that they proceeded north up along the west side of the Blitzen River and over the narrows between Malheur and Harney Lake. So they would have then gone around the north side of Harney Lake. Well, around that time, of course, this adds quite a bit of distance onto the trip. And so around that time, people are starting to get kind of disgruntled with Elliot. And I guess there was some incident where I guess a group of men became so hostile that they lashed up some wagon tongues and were getting ready to lynch the poor man. And it sounds as though it was probably only by the pleading of his wife that he, they spared his life. So I think after that, it kind of seems as though Elliot sort of relinquished leadership of this entire train, and all these different wagon groups kind of started operating more independently. But from there, they proceeded across this long, dry stretch to the bend in the Deschutes River, probably following roughly where Highway 20 is now. And when they got to the Deschutes River, they knew that they would have to follow the river upstream, and that the Diamond Peak was the landmark they were to be looking for, and that the new route would be coming around the south side of Diamond Peak. So anyway, some scouts went up the Deschutes River, which would be in a southerly direction, and they somewhere around Gilchrist or Crescent, they find blazes, but it doesn't look like the road's been opened up. That's right. One thing if I could just backtrack, I'd forgotten to mention that there apparently was a lot of down timber in the mountains that had not been cleared. So anyway, so they progress on down or up the Deschutes. The wagons then cross over somewhere around where Crescent Creek comes into the Deschutes from the west. They would have followed Crescent Creek around the north side of Odell Butte. They would have then gone up Big Marsh Creek around the west side of Odell Butte, and then turning west, they would have gone around the south side of Crescent Lake, right there. And so then they would have proceeded up over the summit and would have crossed over probably a little bit to the north of Summit Lake. So that would have brought them down into the upper headwaters of the middle fork of the Willamette. Apparently the going got really tough. They described men working in teams with hand axes, chopping slots down into these big down trees, the width of wagon wheels, and everybody, including women and children, dragging rocks and logs and dirt up against these logs to ramp up to the cuts so that they could drag these wagons up and over these obstacles. The progress slowed down significantly, and of course, they lost a lot of livestock coming across this dry stretch, and they're running out of provisions. And of course, these people are only too aware of what had happened to the Donner Party a few years before that down on the California Trail. So around that time, there was a man by the name of Martin Blanding who decided to go on ahead with his horse and see if he could get to the valley. So he follows the middle fork of the Willamette down into the foothills. And somewhere down there, his mare gave birth to a colt, which he claims was stillborn. Now, of course, he was starving, so he built up a fire to cook this colt. Well, of course, the fire attracted the attention of settlers in the valley, and they came up into the foothills to investigate. And so they find this half-starved individual, and he tells them there's hundreds more back there in those mountains. And that was the first they'd heard of that. So anyway, they spread the word really fast. I mean, they must have had horsemen going in different directions, doors pounded on in the middle of the night. And according to articles in the Statesman at that time, by the next morning, by next day at least, they had pulled together 23 wagons, over 90 packed animals, loaded up with 20,000 pounds of flour, along with bacon, potatoes, and other foodstuffs. And they were on their way up the middle fork the next day. It was really a pretty remarkable response given the sparse population of that area at that time. So it took them about 3 days to reach the immigrants, and they reached them on October 19th at a place called Rigdon Meadow, which is probably about 25 miles upriver from Oak Ridge. And and of course, at that point, this long stream of wagons and people was strung out all the way back over the summit. Well, you can kind of imagine what a meeting this must have been. There were a lot of hungry mouths to feed, and of course, they built up fires and were turning out, flapjacks and bacon about as fast as they could. So it was really quite a celebration. And but then, of course, from there, they had to proceed on with their wagons and supplies. And their trials were far from over, because then they had to cross over the Willamette about 27 times on their way down into the valley. So the Klein party arrived in the valley on October 27th, which would have been about 8 days after the rescuers had reached them. Now, you might be wondering, so whatever happened to the advance party that left the train back in September? That's kind of a whole other story, but I'll just be brief. They probably left the train with enough provisions for a week at the most, and it took them 40 days to reach the valley. They apparently, I think they had butchered 3 of their horses. The others they'd lost them. They took a more northerly route. Apparently, when they got to the Deschutes, they mistaken the Sisters Mountains for Diamond Peak, so they crossed over the Deschutes, went on up into the Sisters Wilderness, and they crossed over the saddle between the South and Middle Sister. So that would have brought them down into the headwaters of the McKenzie River. So they made it. They actually didn't arrive in Springfield until a couple days after the word had already gone out about all these people up the Middle Fork. So anyway, I discovered that there's actually a trail marker at Oak Ridge down on the Green Waters Park near the river. It commemorates this event, and it has quite a bit of text on it, and it actually mentions my ancestor, Colonel Klein, which is how the other immigrants apparently referred to him, indicating that he had come west with a large herd of cattle in hopes of starting a new herd in Oregon, but he ended up having to butcher all of them before he got to the valley. So this was really, as I learned about this story and about this whole story about this family being caught up in this westward expansion of America, and also the fact that it touched on a number of those interesting pre-Civil War events like the Trail of Tears, the Mexican War. It really kind of captivated me, and I sort of kept thinking, boy, this would really make a good historical novel. And of course, the more I thought about it, the more it kept coming back to me. Well, I guess nobody else is going to write this novel. So I decided to give it a try. So I started writing it about 3 years ago, and I just got it published last November. So anyway, I'm going to be signing some books after dinner, and if the $10 that you pay for this book goes to the library. So with that, I'd like to open this up to any questions that you might have. Yeah.
I heard a story about a blue bucket mine, or is that part of that train story as well?
Yes, it kind of is. It's they're actually, when they were trying to develop this trail, there was an earlier expedition by Stephen Meek, a trapper who had led a party of immigrants in 1855 across central Oregon. But that particular expedition had kind of ended in disaster, with a lot of people heading north up the Deschutes to the Columbia. But one of their objectives was to tie into the old Meek Trail, and that was to be part of this trail follows kind of the old Meek Trail. But I think the Blue Bucket Mine, now that might have been possibly that scouting party that ran into that in 1852 maybe. Unless
It had to do with the Blitzen River and the crossing on the Blitzen. There was some bucket of water, a blue bucket, and found some nuggets in it or something.
Well, now my understanding somehow was that they were looking for that mainly to the north of these lakes, but and I think it might have been, come to think of it, the Meek party that somehow had reported this, and then when the scouting party came across, they were kind of looking for that as they went across.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was the 1845 lost wagon train.
Okay.
Meek train was in 1845.
Yeah. And there's a book that's going to be coming out pretty soon. I've had, when I did research, and of course I got on Ancestry.com and everything, and I've sort of developed correspondences with some of the people who knew something. There's one of them who was actually a descendant of one of those, that part of that list. But one of the things that they did was that they took a little bit more northerly route through here, which enabled them to tie into the Crooked River and had more water available that way. But it's kind of interesting because after all of the difficulty with this, that this was only used as an immigrant route one more time, and then it never was used after that.